Good day and welcome to a Life in Motion podcast. This is season 1, Awakening, and this is already the 4th episode, Biases. And I hope we are not biased when we are bringing in this wonderful panel of speakers. I'm very pleased to have together with me today Rob, Leon, and Andrea, who are going to now introduce themselves into the audience. I would start with the old ladies first rule. So, Andrea, could you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi, everyone, and hi, Eduardo. I was hoping you're not going to start like that. Is that a bit of a bias? But very happy to take the lead here. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the session. My name is Andrea. I help life science leaders to manage the complexity of multi-year transformation programs. And how I try to do that is really looking and bringing the human part of the transformation, how I call it, the human-centric change management into the picture. I think biases are very essential in our private and personal life, and I think are not just some abstract ideas, but they really impact the decision that we take on a daily basis, how we look at things, and also eventually how we lead in business and in private life.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for coming, for taking my hint and then picking it up. I absolutely love how we make it work. Leon, would you, before going there, we have met online, right, Andrea? And I like adding a little bit of context when introducing the panelists here. I was really feeling connected when I read about your story, your profile, your experiences. It felt like we have shared some very similar experiences, though in different companies. And when I thought about biases, the first thing that exploded in my mind was, yeah, Andrea would know that. She has seen it firsthand. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you, Eduardo.
Leon, welcome.
Eduardo, hello, everyone. Thank you. I'm Leon. I'm very grateful to be here. The way that I relate to biases is both personally and professionally. So professionally, I own a company called Leader U in Belgium. And what we do is we help companies evolve the way they trust themselves, each other, and the markets. So we specialize in measuring and managing trust in businesses in order to help the business thrive. And in that lies biases. So we help people unpick biases in how they trust themselves and each other. But personally, I also am curious about this topic because I grew up in South Africa, where during the apartheid years, we lived with quite a lot of bias. It was literally a black and white world that turned into something Nelson Mandela introduced as the Rainbow Nation. So it was an inspiring lived experience through biases, which I'm grateful to talk about today. So thank you for the invitation. Thanks, Eduardo. Hi, everyone.
Thank you so much, Leon. And it is such an interesting fact that we have got connected through family, right? Actually, my brother knows Leon's wife very well. And then he said to me once, I've met Leon and you're going to love him. You and him, you have so much to share and you share so many values. And I thought, is my brother biased now? Or is he seeing something that is really true? And it was really true. So I'm deeply touched and honored to be connected with you and to have spent quality time with you, Leon, and really, really proud to have you in the program today.
Thank you, Eduardo.
My dear friend Rob, here are we again on a podcast. Can you believe it? Welcome to it. And please introduce yourself to the audience.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Eduardo, and hello, everyone. So I'm Rob McPhillips, and I developed a program called Unifiers, which helps new leaders come to grips with a massive leap of going from being a doer to being a leader. So basically, it came from way back. I started off when I was 20. I opened up a gym and I studied nutrition. And so I realized that people in fitness talked about fitness differently than people in nutrition, which kind of led me to why don't people stick to their diets and regimes, which led me to therapy. And through all of these, I saw that there's different schools of thought. So depending on which therapist you went to, you'd see a different set of biases, whether they were talking about your childhood, whether your cognitive processes. So my journey's been through all of that kind of bias, through psychology, through how you have different schools of psychology, through into learning about relationships and conflict, which led me to realize that really it's about becoming a team. And where I came to Unifiers was I realized that people, you need to unify a team before they can lead it. And so that's kind of the set of biases that I've come through to in my journey.
Thank you so much, Rob. I would love to add the frame that we also met online, and we have met online a long, long time back. And then you invited me, you were very kind to invite me to your book club. And we started running a few book review sessions online with that. And those are some of the most amazing memories I have on LinkedIn, on joining this sort of format of lives and podcasts and the sorts. Much of that inspired me here to create this space and to create this format to give back to the community. So thank you so much, Rob, for doing that and for being that for the community.
Thank you.
Amazing. We are warmed up. You know us. We don't know you, so be welcome to bring your questions live. If you have any or comments, I'll be reading it and bringing it into the live chat. Now, I would like to start this session in a similar way I started the others by bringing alignment or exposing the gaps. So, what are biases? I think that's the question. And when I wrote my book, A Life in Motion, I basically borrowed the definition from Daniel Kahneman. No mistaken there. I used so much of his work and insights when thinking of bias. According to him, a bias is a tendency to lean in a certain direction, often to the detriment of an open mind. The way I see it, I visualize it as you are shooting towards your aim, and it doesn't matter what you do, you're always shooting a little bit to the right. So you may try to cross correct, you may try to do a lot of things. In the end, it's still landing there, and you don't know why. And it's usually because of a bias that is hindering you and putting you in a certain position that only allows you to see that side of the aim. Now, that's how I see it. I'm very curious to know how you see it. Maybe we could start with Leon. You could share a bit your definition of biases and maybe some story that resonates with you when it comes to them.
Well, I thought a little bit about what does biases mean to me, apart from all the wonderful, beautiful expert advice out there. What I learned was that there's conscious and unconscious biases based on our lived experience. I mean, we live this life. You have no say in the coordinates of where you're born and the context within which you are born. You are incarnated in this life's experience somewhere, some time. And then we live life. And it's our exposure of that lived experience that shapes our conscious and our unconscious understanding of how the world is, right? I can remember as a child being told that a dog is a man's best friend because we were dog people, right? And then later on, you discover, well, not all dogs are man's best friend. And then I was told that divas, because they scratch you and all sorts of selfish behavior. And then you get a cat purring around your knees, you know. And it's only when I experienced an alternative to what I believe to be true that I become aware of actually I may have lived in a misunderstanding. So for me, and I may be completely wrong, I have a very simple view of life. It's literally, it's not something to wish away or to want to be different, just to respect, to say, I have my perception of how life is because of my lived experience. And my biases are literally a reflection of that. I don't think it's a right or a wrong thing. It's just something to be aware of as a starting point. But I'm looking forward to learn from you. What do you think biases are? Help me understand it
I
better.
absolutely love that, Leon. And we may be diving already into some solutioning. I definitely noted down here awareness. I would love to come back to it. But maybe now we could hear from Andrea. What are your thoughts? What is a bias for you and what role does it play in your life?
Maybe before going there, I was smiling when Leon was saying about how do you remember life, because it reminded me of quote from Gabriel Garcia Marquez, when he was saying that what matters in life is not what happens to you. I'm just looking because I'm reading it, but what you remember and how you remember it.
Beautiful.
I read some of his books, and I remember the beginning of one of the book when he was sharing his biography was saying like, this is not the life I lived, but this is the life how I remember living it. And I
Beautiful.
think bias affects how you remember and how you relate yourself to life and how life relates to you. I think it's very nicely said.
Beautifully said.
Now that we reach out to Gabriel Garcia Marquez, I think for me, bias, it's kind of like, a shortcut when you find yourself in a complex situation and then you relate yourself to things that are comfortable, to things that are around you for a long time. And it is something that we do unconsciously most of the time to protect ourselves, but in the same time that limit us because we keep on close off new perspectives and protecting old patterns, old behaviors. I think it's also a way on how do we relate to the other people around us and also how do we relate what is happening to us from the others to ourselves. It kind of relates to our life principles, to our value system. And this is mainly built up on how we see life. And it takes a big load of having a bias in it as well. I think in my private life, the most, common situation is when you go for dinner with a friend and you're sitting one across each other at the table looking at the menu and you're like, what are you ordering? What are you taking? And you're afraid of saying. And when they say something and it's like, but I want you to take exactly the same thing. And then you order something different just to be different, right? Because you are afraid of that group thinking or I don't want to have the same thing. On the other hand, in the business environment, I do believe it's happening all the places. Like you go in a meeting and you tend to favorize ideas or perspectives or recommendations from people that you are much closer or you see them more as equal to you or that are in the same department or in the same closer circle to you rather than people that are more outsiders or younger and that's part of bias. And I think it's happening all day long, every day to each of us. It's just the trick on how to recognize it or how to be aware, to become aware of it, and then using some tricks that we're going to talk later to overcome it, or at least to minimize it as much as we can to allow the new habits and the new perspectives settling in more.
I love that, Andrea, and definitely. So after awareness, what comes next, right? So you listed a few ideas, a few things that can be done. Can we mitigate it? Can we control it? Or is it only about being aware of them to understand the impact on the decisions? I think that is a lot of territory there for us to explore. I really, really appreciate your contribution. Rob, how could you complement or add or challenge it?
There's a few parts that really fit with my ideas. So I tend to take these things and try to make them into a big picture, which basically is using bias. So I think that there's a spectrum. I liked when you were talking about Daniel Kahneman's of a definition of a leaning towards an area, because I think there's a spectrum. And I think there's a spectrum that is a very real dilemma at the moment, which is AI versus humans. And AI is obviously all about logic and it's about objectivity. And humans are all about emotion and experience. Now, when I think of life, like in every second, we're bombarded by about 300 billion separate pieces of data. Now, clearly, we can't process all of that. And so there is a principle of cognitive economy, which means that we cut down just into basically looking for things that confirm what we already believe, unless it's a point of danger. So what I see is that bias is like, if you imagine life has every potential, but in order to experience it, we just experience a tiny bit through our life. And in order to do that, we have to focus on just a certain set of facts. And in order for us to be able to operate, we have to focus more on a tiny set and lean towards what we're choosing. So the problem with biases isn't bias itself, because I don't think bias is a bug. I think bias is a feature that enables us to experience human life. The problem is when we're controlled by it and not conscious of it. So for me, it's fundamentally about growing our awareness of which biases we choose to use and where we consciously choose to lean towards.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to build on what Rob said, and I think there are different level of biases, right? It's one, the individual bias, which it's all, as you said, about emotions and control and how we are listened into the group or the ecosystem we are part of. And then is this the group level bias where it's affected or at least it's influenced by some power dynamics, if I can call them. So you tend to comfort and agree to the group decision, which maybe sometimes it's against your own thinking or your own decision, because there are different levels. And also when you bring, for specifically in an organization, when you bring different other levels on the individual teams, sub-functions, organization, and so on, it creates quite of a complexity of managing and being aware of how bias is exercised at the different levels, individual, group, and so on. And that's, to me, it's a complex part, but it's also the beauty of looking at it and trying to be aware when it's happening and how to address it.
If it's possible, just to, if that's possible. So, I totally agree. And I think we have a real case study now. When you look at what's happening in America, one of the biggest bias that I often look at is basically the fundamental attribution error, which is basically the way I look at it is kind of, we explain away, like if we both fall over, we're going to explain it away that I fell over because the floor was slippy, but they fell over because they're clumsy. And there's the basic core bias that we have is that we experience life. So when we're in an event, we experience the internal feelings, and so we have all of these rationale to excuse why we do what we do. But when we look at others, we see them. We see their external. We don't know any of the internal thinking process. And so we judge them on their character. And that, exactly as you say, Andrea, is the fundamental attribution error is individual, but there's a group attribution error, which is where like the MAGA bunch and the Democrats will judge each other as being, they're lefty liberal or they're a MAGA, gun loving, whatever. And we're attributing our bias. So fundamentally, as humans, we want to belong, we want to feel valued, and we want to feel that what we do is meaningful. And so every decision we make is biased through those three keys of who do we choose to be in our tribe? What tribe do we want to be? So if we're in marketing and we're in a silo, that's competitive with sales or whatever, we see them and we judge them through a different frame than we judge our colleagues. And so all of these decisions are fundamentally driven by wanting to belong to a tribe, because a tribe is you're in or you're out, defined on basic characteristics. And so this bias affects all of the way that we perceive and act.
Rob, do you mind if I add to that? Rob, I absolutely agree with you, and Andrea as well. This groupthink idea, the fact that we're looking for safety in numbers, we're looking for our tribe, and it's an age-old problem. And it's because we're hairless monkeys. We're constantly at threat. Our entire brain is designed to scan for threat because we are meant to die. How are we alive? We're hairless monkeys, right? And what I find interesting is that concept of aloneness is becoming less and less of an evolutionary inhibitor. Because in today's connected world, you can find your community in a second. You can be the strangest tree-hugging, frog-kissing person in the world, and you will find thousands of people out there who share the same passion as you. So this idea that we are constantly at threat by being alone is becoming less and less of an evolutionary inhibitor. And I think we're currently at an evolutionary stepping point where we can leave all that old history behind and start by asking, who are you? How do I relate? And the who are you starts with safety, the assumption of safety. I am allowed to be who I am, with everything that I know and everything that I love, and I am safe. The moment you remove threat, harmful biases, I find, take a different kind of flavor. So it's the concept of threat, which I find interesting in this context of biases, because I love the question you asked, Eduardo, is it helpful or not? Is it helpful or harmful? And I think that's a really good question. Are we at an evolutionary step where we can leave all our old noise behind and start making new assumptions about biases being helpful, in breeding optimism. A bias which I find really interesting is anchoring, for example. If we use anchoring biases to create innovation or drive new groundbreaking ideas. Befriend biases, because I think biases also suffer with a bit of a bad rep because of this threat idea that we have constantly.
Leon, maybe I can ask you something there. Don't you think it's also a generation threat? Like the new generation is much more open to leave biases aside and be who they are and just show up out there to the world how they really are, while the older generation or the more conservative ones, or I don't know, millennials, everything after probably 1990 or before 1990 are a little bit more into the bias system. How do you see it?
Well, I hear the stereotype and I receive it everywhere. I'm 50 years old now. When I was born, for a large part of my childhood, computers did not exist. I mean, think about that, right? I'm now a highly connected human being. We all are. So I think the idea of a generation being trapped in an old way of living is also a little old. I think if we were to categorize people, it's people who have the ability to evolve and those who are less able to let go of things and pick up new things. And I think in that separation, it is true. There are people on planet Earth, regardless of age, that just, I think, feel fearful and at threat. And with that comes a lot of noise. And biases is one of them. End up in prejudice, for example, and all sorts of horrible things about cognitive biases about us and them, Have you been in a situation or conversation where you're like talking about, them? It's not you, you're fine, but them, right? That anonymous them comes from a place of fear, I think. And it's time we leave that stuff behind.
I think age is a bias on the point that not necessarily that it leads you, like, I think there's layers and layers and layers of bias. And what makes a person is the biases that they're being exposed to. So Leon said right at the beginning about the coordinates of where you're born is an accident, but those coordinates are going to lead you to a certain bias. And I really like the Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. And he talks about how different generations have a different attitude to money because of their experiences. So someone who was brought up, in a depression is going to have an aversion to borrowing. Someone who was brought up in the boom years is probably going to be more optimistic financially. There are certain things that happen. So like a stock market crash or a depression or recessions, and they influence how a whole generation thinks. And that has a bias on age. Where you were born has a bias on the culture that you grow up experiencing, which is so foundational to who you are as a person. Whether you're intelligent or not, or less intelligent, you're probably going to have been streamed in school. So you're going to be exposed to different behaviors. You may go on to university where you have different life opportunities. So you're going to view things differently. The religious beliefs, all of these things kind of narrow down who you are as a person. None of them on their own define you, but the collection of those experiences are going to shape the bias that you hold. So I think it's about the layering of those bias.
Yes, and if I can add to that, I think I fully agree what you both said. I think it's somewhere in the middle. And when we look as us as individual and human beings, not everyone wants to change. Some people are very comfortable in the position where they are without technology, without understanding what bias is, without learning how to grow, I don't know, potatoes or so on. Some people are comfortable with where they are today, and that's perfectly fine. While other people are more into innovation and discovery and learning and growing and developing. And that's also fine. And then you have a lot of spectrum in between where people are doing small things at a different pace and growing and understanding a bit more of this notion and learning more about that. And that's also okay. What I think it is important to become aware is that We cannot eliminate bias. We cannot eliminate the judgment that what we get from the people around or us judging other people. I think it's a very natural phenomenon that it's happening to a certain extent to each of us, more or less. But becoming aware when it's happening and trying to find that living mechanism and accepting mechanism in the ecosystem where you have people changing at a faster rate that we do, people staying in the same status that they are for the last 20 years, and again, everything else in between. To me, that's the magic and the sweet spot of really becoming, raising the awareness to ourselves if this is the direction that we want to go through or the journey that we want to go through, but also being more acceptable and more inclusive with the people or with the situation around us where maybe bias or judgment is much higher or it happens much more than we expect. And it's kind of like balancing this is never a 50-50 situation.
Invictus, highly recommend it. It's about rugby. Best game in the world.
Yes, that's fairly said. Yes, it is.
I remember a little bit of what happened to us in South Africa in that bias kind of world. I mean, literally, when I was born in 1975 on a Wednesday, I was born into the apartheid world. It's literally a black and white world. I'm black, you're white. Two definitions of human being. But the truth is that we were so beautifully diverse. I mean, that tip of Africa received everyone. From Northern Africa, from Europe, from everywhere. You had Dutchmen and Portuguese and Xhosas and Insipedis. You had the Bushmen of the Kalahari that can run for days, all living in the tip of Africa. It's this incredibly beautiful place. And I was born in black and white. And then Nelson Mandela woke us up to the possibility that actually the truth is that we live in a rainbow nation. Now, that was an incredibly powerful metaphor for us because the largest group of people in our country were not allowed to go to school. So he was talking to our uneducated mass. But it doesn't matter if you went to school or not. Everybody understood a rainbow. And he double-clicked on it. He went, look, purple doesn't stand next to yellow and doesn't need to. But purple is beautiful and yellow is beautiful. And when we stand back from the rainbow, the whole rainbow is beautiful. So be your yellow self, be your purple self without hating another color, right? And everyone got it. Now, I can't say that South Africa is there yet. We still have the dream, right? It's struggling to find its beauty, right? But it is a rainbow nation. I'm so grateful for living through that through my childhood to discover the lie or the misunderstanding of black and white and discovering color. Now, when we talk about biases, I think what that's turned into is whenever I'm presented with a fact, a so-called fact, the first question I have is, what evidence do I have that this is true? Show me evidence that this is a black and white world. It's impossible. My Zulu mother, Aleta Radeba, bless her soul, was the most beautiful Zulu woman, incredible character, right? The store manager of one of my stores there was a Bushman of the Kalahari. Another one was a traditional prince from the Xhosas, huge man. It's impossible to say with black and white. The moment your brain goes, prove it, the bias starts becoming a little bit crusty. And you kind of go, okay, maybe there's a different version of it. And to Rob's point, you can stand back from someone and have empathy for someone who grew up in Nepal, or have empathy and understanding for someone who grew up in currently the Americas or currently Palestine. You can stand back from it and make assumptions and empathy and understanding about, I can just imagine what that must be like. But then, like you say, Rob, it's about the layering of it, to not make assumptions of people and then attribute something to someone to say, you are an everyone. You know, it's that kind of, at what point does big picture and small picture become helpful and unhelpful? for me and biases?
I think, first of all, we need to be aware and educate ourselves about what bias is, what different shapes it takes, and the fact that it can happen at different levels. I remember also for me when I was reading the different type of cognitive biases that are out there, which are the most well-known or which are the most happening in our daily life, I was like, I do that. Or I didn't realize that.
Yeah, quite.
I mean, we do. And that was actually the first step because it's kind of like plant a seed in my brain. And then when I was doing it again, I was like, yes, but Andrea, be aware that you are doing it again. And then it starts kind of like the trigger, or at least for me, on thinking differently. And what I like to do also is, especially when I'm having workshops with different teams where we need to take a decision, is a bit having like a check-in, check-out around the room to understand, for example, what kind of assumptions are driving our decision today? Who else we are missing at the table to take a decision? Do we go this direction because it's more comfortable, or we go, as you say, Leon, earlier, we go this direction because we have the evidence to prove it? And you don't have to go from, let's say, from zero to hero. I didn't know about biases and now I know everything, and I'm not a biased person, because I do strongly believe that we cannot eliminate completely bias from our thinking. But being aware and educate ourselves about it, and also why not spread the words a bit around our circle, how you are doing now with us, Eduardo, and with the people live out there on LinkedIn, sharing a bit from our knowledge and making this awareness a bit more broader than our immediate circle or immediate level of interactions around us, because it starts with us, but it's about us, but it has to happen also on some level so the people around us that we interact the most as well, to eventually overcome that, and being aware more at a group level while you do that kind of awareness exercise on the individual level in different.
I think, as Leon said, and I think Andrea said in a slightly different way, it's all about acceptance. And so for me, I think there's 3 fundamental keys when I look at the journey of leadership. And that is clarity, communication, and connection. When we communicate, and I like to look at the etymology of communication, and communication means to make common. And I think what communication does is it puts all the information on the table where everyone has access to it and everyone can then build the best model. So once we have communication and once we stop the judgment and we stop pushing for what we want, but we all agree to move together, which is connecting and moving as one connected group, then what we need to do is, so I often talk about the human operating system, that we operate most of our lives on autopilot. And these are beliefs or decisions that we made probably in our childhood, but at some point, and we've never revisited them consciously. And so for example, in my work as a mediator in working with conflict, what you really have to look at is what are the assumptions and the beliefs and the expectations that someone had about a situation. Because when you get to that, that's when you get to the biases. And so the first stage is to uncover and get clarity about what the biases are. And the second stage, because eventually the group has to decide what they stand for, what they're going to do, what the way of moving forward is. And that is about then consciously choosing your bias. So if this is the strategy we're going to follow, then this is the bias. We've all worked through our individual bias. And now we've got to make a bet, because the strategy is cutting off options and choosing a way forward. And so we then have to realize that our shared sense of purpose, shared sense of strategy moving forward is a bias. And so what we're then doing is monitoring, does the bias work? So basically, is it working or is it not? And this is where you can overcome the groupthink by constantly putting in objectivity. I think the question Leon asked of how do we know what's true? And so we have to have some benchmarks and some way of measuring if what we say is true. And for me, if something has validity, it can withstand challenge. So I think everything has to be open to being challenged. And that starts with leaders having the willingness to accept that they may be wrong and the answers can come from anywhere.
I see that.
We lost him.
That's okay. I'm really inspired by what you're saying, Rob. And Andrea, I know you've raised your hand already before me.
Yes, I wanted to say, I mean, I don't know if we're still on live or not, but I wanted to say that it really resonates what you were saying earlier, Rob, about the role of the leader and how to create that environment to really address the bias. And what I think is really important is to foster and to create a culture of the critical thinking and have that psychologically safety where you can ask the question to challenge the status quo, to understand and to create the awareness of the bias. Because if it is a toxic culture or if it's an environment where people cannot speak up, the leader has a very tough job and not even understanding and assessing the bias, but also to create that space where people can speak up and share their idea, share their understanding, share their critical thinking, which might also challenge the leader herself or himself.
Fully agree with you. I mean, a lot of the work we do, Andrea, in trust is about moral compatibility. And it's not about moral singularity. Let's have a session where we talk about our biases and then when we end up agreeing what is in, what is out. It's not about that. It literally tables the question or versus and.
Yes.
And the further we move away from or and the more we move towards and, we find that there's a more collaborative space there. It's really quite exciting to think about that. And in moral compatibility, the literal exercise we run with people, we ask people, what do you care about? Give us your top 3 values at work. Some people might value discipline, for example. And some people say, for me to come to work every day, I need to have creativity and innovation, right? And they stand in almost black and white opposition to each other. But when you walk them into that colorful space of how do these 2 things live in full force and in complement with each other, that's amazing. I mean, imagine a world where you are both innovative and creative while being disciplined with a budget. It's a really exciting place, right? But we often walk into the or space rather than the and space. And I find that's also a helpful space to discuss. And to your point, Rob, is clarity, communication, and connection. It's about being clear about what is this and what is it not, you know? Sometimes we misunderstand people's biases. Communication about how does it translate and what does it mean to me? If you have a bias, how does it affect me? And finally, is connection, is then that and space. Is how do you create moral compatibility rather than moral singularity? Sorry, Eduardo, we've just been talking because you got us going.
You're heroes. When the host drops and people connect and continue the conversation, I know I did something wrong. Something wrong on the internet, but I know I did something right on getting you together. So that was lovely. Thank you so much for it.
That's so true.
We are self-manageable here.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We still need you though, so please don't
Yes.
go.
I was just going to grab a cup of coffee.
Yeah, exactly. Don't leave us. I think this conversation might run out of control. It's really quite engaging.
It's a lovely conversation, and it deeply connects with me, Leon, what you said about moral compatibility and exploring that. And most of all, back to the connection from Rob, finding the ways, finding the connections, right? Because they may not be obvious. The biases may be coming from such different places that then it doesn't make it easy in a room, in a company, or even in our community to converge. And I have experienced that at corporate. I think, Andrea, that's where, again, some of our connections, some of our experiences are shared. But recently, I have been working a little bit closer here with the community in Switzerland and haven't noticed exactly the same thing. You would expect maybe because it is a smaller community and it's more like-minded people as we are very eager to label it, right? That is natural convergence and everybody's working their biases together. That's not true. that is effort. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that. I see the role of the leader helping the people to walk through that and really explore, open up those biases, and then really working, as Rob mentioned, towards agreeing, deciding which biases we are going to follow. What do you think? Leon, you wanted to say something.
Now, Eduardo, be careful. You may have stepped on a landmine with the three of
I
us.
was
because
about to say,
we're
I
all
was
going to
like,
start talking at the same
you
time.
start talking first, so I have to wait now. But please go ahead, Leon.
No, Andrea, I'm using your words. The role of the leader is psychological safety, right? And one thing I'm adding to that is I fully agree with you that the role of the leader is to create the psychological safety for the human being to arrive, not the human doing to arrive. That's a very important place. Oftentimes, the people we meet in the corporate world are human doings. I have a role, I have a title, this is my number, this is who I am. But great leaders are able to create the warmth where the human being can step forward. And the moment you see the human being, the connection becomes so much stronger. So I double click on what your advice was, Andrea. Psychological safety. Trust, number one.
Fully agree and fully resonates what you're saying, Leon. What you're saying, Eduardo, earlier with the role of the leader, I think I agree and I disagree with it, because I think the role of the leader is to create the environment for the individual to thrive and to grow and to show up there. The role of the leader is not to speak about biases, and yes, to create an environment where you can raise the awareness and you can speak freely, but the leader himself or herself will not going to fix the biases in an organization or in a team. Will be the change in the mindset and the behavior of the individuals coming up and speaking up about the different things that will eventually help addressing the bias that is sitting there at the table.
Can I ask Rob a question? Rob, I'm curious and fascinated about your space because you specialize in conflict, right? You meet people in places where they're literally colliding with each other like blown up balloons. How do you help that environment change? How do you help people connect? Sorry to ask the question, Eduardo. I know that's your job.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, there's so much to go on. I think really you opened with it, Leon, when you talked about creating trust. I think, like Andrea says, psychological safety. And then it's about communication. And I love what you've added of the and, because I think that distinction between or and is what creates growth. Because while we're in or, we're picking tribes and we're throwing rocks at each other. When we say and is when we grow. So I look at, the summation of everything I've come to believe is that we need unifiers. Now, unifiers are, for me, Nelson Mandela is a standout example. Unifiers are those people that bring us together in the moments that we need them. I look at, you have Kemal Ataturk in Turkey, who created the modern Turkey. You have the United Arab Emirates, which was created by, I don't remember the name of the founding father, but he basically brought together all of the tribes. I think Winston Churchill did it while we were during the war. And so then when you look at unifiers, you have to look at what's the opposite. And I think we have the standout example of in the divided states of America now. Well, Donald Trump has created this sense of fear and division and stoked the flames of hatred. So to bring this back to your point in a mediation, and the reason a mediation so often works is because it is creating that safe space. I've forgotten the name, but if you can remember the Milgram research studies, and I can't remember the obedience one. I don't know if you've ever seen the experiment where basically a research group in a circle, and they show them a line, and one line is clearly longer than the other.
Mm-hmm.
What the last person doesn't realize is that everyone else has been set up. And there's this line, and everyone's saying, yes, this line is the longer one. This line's the longer one. And you can see the stress and like whatever. But it comes to the last person, and they say, well, which line is longer? And they say, yeah, that line's longer. They know it's not, but because the power of groupthink is so strong that they're influenced by that. And I think that is the key that the leader has. I really like the phrase of the prime minister, prime minister inter pairs, first among equal. All ministers here in the UK, I'm not sure how it is everywhere else, but here our government is run by a prime minister, and all ministers are supposed to be equal, but he's just first. And I think that framing, that the leader, because of their authority, and ideally, it doesn't work if it's just positional authority, but it comes from kind of like what you said, you talked about moral compatibility, Leon. It comes from moral authority, that when people choose to follow someone, that gives the person a lot more weight behind what they say. And what the leader says, and this is why leaders have to be very careful of how they lead a team in terms of their bias, because they can lead a team into, as Donald Trump can, you can lead them into somewhere way off, or you can lead them like Nelson Mandela did into a state of connection. To cut a long story short, basically you have to create this frame where people feel safe. Usually in a mediation, sometimes the people want to come together at first, or at the beginning it's kind of bitching at each other and there's a lot of emotion. And so the key thing that each person needs is usually you'll break off into private rooms. You'll have a private discussion. And basically there you're acting as a confidant, and you're saying, what's the likelihood of happening? If it goes to court, what's your chances of winning, and what if it doesn't? And so you work through someone's fears, which goes back to your point about it all being about threat. And so you create a space where people feel safe, and you let them talk out their internal thinking. And then when they're at a point where you've got both of them clear about the threat of not coming to an agreement, about what they're willing to take, what they're willing to give, and whatever, that's when you can come together and have a conversation. And so often in a day-long mediation, you don't actually get to once you usually get people back for the final, when they're really ready to open up and talk about coming to terms, that's when everything happens. And all of the build-up is creating the place where the person feels safe. But it all starts with making someone feel heard, making them feel accepted, making them feel it's okay how they are, and leading them into a place where they feel safe and able to communicate who they are and what they're about and what's important to them.
You remind me of an experience my wife and I had. I made a mistake in booking tickets to a music concert. I thought I was booking Michael Bublé tickets. Okay. I don't know what I did wrong. It's probably a speed wobble, but I accidentally booked tickets for a Kiss concert. Now, if ever you've seen Kiss, these are very different communities, right? Oh, very different. Similar at human level, actually. But you can imagine we only discovered my mistake when we got into the queue in Birmingham, right? We were dressed in pastels, dressed for a country picnic, for a Michael Bublé concert, right? Everybody else there had face paint and Zs across their foreheads and, hair up to there. And all of a sudden, Lily and I thought, do we go in? That's the first question. And because there's a mass agreement there, and we were completely out. I like Kiss, right? It's a really nice music, but we were very oddly dressed. So I felt that insecurity, and Lily and I literally huddled together. We were like this in the queue, didn't speak to anyone. Of course, we stood out like a sore thumb. And then we were humbled the rest of that evening by the generosity of the many, right? And it reminds me in the space of biases where there is groupthink, and you'll become aware of groupthink. This can be a company's culture. How does a new employee become welcome there? If we're clumping together at the school gates, because of 5-year friendships, how does the visual of this group of people create an insecurity for people? And I think that's one of the things that Nelson Mandela did brilliantly. He exhibited constantly the breaking of those boundaries between the many and the few, the many and the few. Now, in South Africa, remember, it was the few that controlled everything. And it was the many that suddenly had a voice. So even then, he would reach through the crowd and speak to a photographer, a white photographer, and say, "Hey, how is your mother's leg?" It's a very strange kind of flip where the majority few became the minority all of a sudden. So I think what that story reminds me of in your example is, how do you have people feel heard? And when you know someone doesn't have a voice, how do you make space for them? For me is a constant challenge. And it's a real challenge, because when I'm with people, my people, you don't become aware of how loud that is and how excluding that is.
And I think I really like your example, Leon, and to build on that, in any, let's say, old time habit, or we always have done it like this, or break through a bias, you need a disruption. And we talked about all these leaders that they did it in a very, let's say, some of them softer or gentle than the others. But what they did something different that was not done before. And that it's happening every time when you want to, let's say, bring new behaviors or new ways of working or new interactions between the different teams. You need a disruption into the process, into the overall thinking. And that disruption practically helps you to make things different on a longer term.
Absolutely.
I was waiting.
I know this is generosity, not shyness. We're making space for each other.
I can start just to.
I'm still processing what Andrea said. There's everything everyone's saying is leading to so many different thoughts. Okay, so we've talked a lot, and we all agree psychological safety is a key, trust is a key, communication is a key, creating a connection. But for me, if we're looking from a leadership position in how do you create a group, what's a group all about? It's all about the culture, how we do things around here. And the way that you create a culture is you choose a few meaningful biases. You choose, this is what we do. This is who we are. This is what we stand for. And so your role as the leader is to be a steward of that culture. You need to choose what are the fundamental. So Leon talked about the top 3 values. And I think that's an excellent thing that we look at. What are our top 3 values that we want the culture to be built around? And so for me, that is the key thing that a leader can do. They can consistently be a steward of, uphold, these are the benchmarks, these are the standards we expect, these are the standards of performance, of behavior, of morality, of conduct. And that's how you consciously choose a culture.
Well, I have pre-written down 2, but first let me just share what I was inspired by, what I learned today from Rob, is clarity, communication, and connection. I think that's great advice. Be clear, communicate, and connect. And then from Andrea, thank you for inspiring psychological safety. But I think also psychological confidence is something I add to that. I think is to not be shy about who you are. You know, it's both creating that psychological. So I'm inspired. This is new information for me. So thank you for that. I think if I could share 2 tips, when it comes to biases, is constantly asking yourself, what evidence do I have that this is true? Qualifying constantly. The moment you come to a conclusion, unconclude it. And the second thing is, what else could be true? To open the space for and. So those are the 2 things that I constantly challenge myself on.
Before I go to the offer, I wanted to take the opportunity to thank also Leon for the candid words. And I think in terms of the biases, what I see it also working is do a recheck or reanalyze of a recent decision. Play the devil advocate and ask yourself deliberately on where bias affected my judgment or the decision thinking or the critical thinking and so on. And really go through the surface assumption and challenge some of the decisions or discussions that were happening related to that. Because if you don't do this exercise and you're just like, okay, you read a book, you heard a podcast and so on, things are kind of, they've been there, but then they are surfacing away as you go to different other challenges and different other situations that requires you more. And doing that homework, I think it really kind of creates a triggering situation into how to assess biases, what is biases about, and recognize it hopefully better and faster next time. I think depending on the situation, as a starting point, probably will be difficult to do it immediately after the decision because you do not understand the circumstances and the effect of the decision afterwards. So maybe it makes sense to see it more at a later stage. But after you get into that behavior, probably it makes sense to do it immediately after and play a bit to different situations.
Well, you can meet me as an individual, as a person with a mission, or in a community. So as an individual, you can connect me on LinkedIn. You'll find me there. It's Leon Roos, Leonroos. And there I just broadcast whatever's on my mind. You will find me in my mission at our company called Trust for Leaders. That's the number 4, where we are on a mission to evolve the way we trust ourselves, each other, and in situations to drive better outcomes. That's our mission. And you'll find me in a community in Sweden called the IDG. It's a global community of people who drive the inner development goals. They believe that global evolution only happens through individual evolution. So I'm an ambassador there. So join me on LinkedIn, Trust for Leaders, or at IDG.
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn, where I shared about the things that are close to my heart about human-centric change management, foresight, and transformation. If you are a leader that you're looking to build trust and really drive transformation in an environment where I will say stakes are high and uncertainty is the norm, feel free to reach out to have a conversation. You can book time with me either through LinkedIn or on my website. And also I'm having now as a writing home, so to say, Substack, where I share more longer articles and research that I do around psychologically safety, candor feedback, and everything around human-centric change management and transformation.
So my mission really now is to help people make the choice to be a unifier. So what I'm doing is I'm sharing the pathway that I see that leaders can go through in the 7 different identities of leadership. So that's at betheunifier.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, and I'm sharing my ideas on YouTube as well, and trying to build a base on there.
Thank you very much, Eduardo, for bringing us together. And thank you, Leon and Rob, for sharing your insights. It was a pleasure to have this conversation together.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Eduardo. Thank you, Leon. Thank you, Andrea. It's been a pleasure, and I've taken so much, and I've got some notes to check out your other works.
Thank you, everyone. I've learned a lot.
Me too. Looking forward to what is about to come.